Hey, it's Chris, the supply chain doctor and host of Supply Chain is Boring. In this two-part interview, we speak with supply chain technology company whisperer Greg Cronin about his long and successful career in supply chain management and what the future holds. It also happens that he and John Hill, who we recently interviewed, are considered the fathers of warehouse management system industry, and you also get the indication that the competitive embers are still alive. In part one, Greg discusses how he got into supply chain management up through his multiple attempts at retirement. And be sure to listen through to the end to hear bonus coverage to get a better understanding of Mr. Cronin. It all sounds pretty boring, so let's see if Greg can prove me wrong.
Greg, thanks again for investing time with me here today to talk about your career and learn about your perspective on supply chain management. I've been in supply chain technology space since the mid-90s, and that's when I first heard your name, and I've seen it pretty consistently since then. Can we kind of just go back to the start, maybe college, how you got into supply chain management?
Sure.
Kind of work through your career there?
I got it through it. Actually, first of all, Chris, thank you for having me. I enjoy this, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I attended Manhattan College because my father went there, and it was in New York City. I also followed his career. He worked back in the 30s for Mitsui, a Japanese trading company, and one of my ambitions in life was to do international business. I thought that would be a very exciting thing. So I started off at Mitsui, and I had a wonderful experience. For 6 months I was in Japan. Japan in 1970 is quite different than it is today. And I learned a lot from the Japanese, really how they structured the business, how they looked and shared information, how they shared decision-making. A lot of the things that people learn later on, I learned there. And I worked in their distribution area, meaning I did paperwork. I basically did customs clearance, import, export. And in those days, a trading company was what it was. We actually traded things. And a lot of money was in exchange because the banking isn't what it is today, and the ability to do transfer of funds, and everything was very different back then. It was quite exciting, but I learned all about import, export, documentation, dealing with ports, shipping, and actually Mitsui was always been very close to me. Many of the companies I worked with later on, Mitsui owns SoftBank, which is a big investor, and both at Velocity, at TrendStar, at a number of companies that I've been involved with over the years, they invested in those companies. So I've always had and maintained a long-lasting relationship with Mitsui. I left Mitsui, though. I actually ended up working for one of Mitsui's 3PL partners, Todd Logistics. It was a port operations in Bayonne and Elizabeth, New Jersey. And I first came in as a supervisor, and then I eventually became warehouse manager and then VP of Ops. And I ran a warehouse, which was longshoremen. I ran a trucking company, operations, which were Teamsters, and I lived through all that to this day. It was quite an experience to have longshoremen and Teamsters. But it started me in technology because we worked for, we had a contract with Government Services Administration, GSA. They were one of the first ones that started barcoding. And that's what got me all involved. Barcodes in those days was sort of a joke. They were about the size of a massive screen, and scanners looked like bazookas. And we didn't know anything about barcoding because we would take these big barcodes and wrap them around a small carton, and voila, we couldn't scan them. And then we realized over time how you really had to utilize that technology. And from that, interesting, I was out in the field and I saw a radio frequency terminal, one of the very first ones. It was TechLogix. It was down. I called Rod Coots up, who was the founder of TechLogix, and I said, I could really picture barcoding and RF technology working together. No one really had done that yet. And I called him up and he said, no, it's not about the hardware, it's about the software. And so he ended up introducing me to a company in New York called IMI Systems, which was one of the first WMSs. And we did Ma Bell and Avon and a couple of other early adopter in the WMS space. And we married RF technology with barcoding to scan, verify that the right product was in the right location at the right time. And I came in and I was probably the only guy that knew how to spell warehouse correctly because these were all techie guys and they didn't know anything about a warehouse. And I did know how things worked, how you receive product, you stored product, you pick product, you ship product. They didn't have a clue. And so I was sort of the sales support, and then I did functional designs, and then eventually I got into the sales side of it. I went to a trade show, gave a little speech, met Jim McHugh of McHugh Freeman, wonderful man. And he hired me as McHugh Freeman's first salesman. So, and here I went from the operation world, physical operation world for 15 years. And now all of a sudden I became a sales guy. And that was quite an experience. And my first sale was Procter & Gamble, which turned out to be the foundation company for warehouse management systems, period. Because once we put in our site, they announced to the Wall Street Journal and to the world the value of a WMS. And for years, I toured with various members of Procter & Gamble where they promoted warehouse management systems and really put it on the map because they showed the benefits to people of the value of having inventory and order accuracy where they never had it anywhere near like that before. The efficiency, with them, we created task interleaving that we knew where the work was and we knew where the operator was, and we would marry the two in an efficient manner. And that was unheard of in those days, and Procter & Gamble promoted this religiously for us, and I still thank them to this day. They put WMS on the map.
Now, Greg, I'll challenge you a little bit here. And not challenge you, but do you know John Hill?
Yeah.
So
I do very well. A wonderful man. He was president of Logisticon. That was the other WMS. Really, okay. The three I just mentioned were probably it in those days. IMI, Q, and Logisticon. Others emerged from that, but they were probably the three original companies. And we all had the same idea. We really merged barcoding with RF technology and created a real-time WMSs, which were unique. And so it was an exciting time.
Yeah.
Partly it was exciting because half the time you didn't know if the project was going to go in right, because this was experiment and risk and the unknown. And the thing I think that separated McHugh Freeman from everybody else was we developed a process of selling it right and delivering it right and going through steps of doing designs, agreeing that that's what the deliverable is going to be, understanding the customer's needs and defining that very clearly and then delivering a system to that. And that process, I think everybody sort of copied us on that as life went on, and we were very successful. That we were probably the least risk of all the WMSs back in the day. We had our risk too, believe me, but I think it was our process and our people really made it right.
Yeah.
And John and he and I interacted for years. He became over time more of a consultant, and I really remained more as an operator.
Yeah.
Over all the years.
Yeah, I just interviewed him last episode, and he didn't claim, I'll have to listen to the words again, but he said he was the godfather of the WMS. So
well, I've been accused of being the father.
Oh, the father of WMS. Yeah.
Well, he and I joke about that, and we're trying to still figure out who the mother is. But
and his claim was
take no credit for it.
and his other claim was J.C. Penney was the first proponent of WMS. So we'll have to get that.
Well, yeah, a retailer, I would say that's true.
Okay.
So at McHugh, we replaced that system 5 years later.
You're still the salesman.
Well, still a competitor. At McHugh, we were focused on consumer goods.
Mm-hmm.
And Logisticon went mostly towards the retail sector. And so I stayed at McHugh for a long time. I became the salesman, and I grew up to become the president and chief operating officer. And I really enjoyed my time there. That was probably one of the greatest team of people I had working together with. I really had fun. And then I was actually recruited away by Alan DeBerry of Manhattan Associates, which at that time was a very small WMS company, but I was swayed by his charm and his vision. And he did have a vision, and he was a brilliant guy. I mean, he is a brilliant guy. And he came up with this idea of packaging a WMS, and much more so than the customized WMSs, which was really the trend back in those days. And he really did the effort of trying to put a package and create a base product that we would sell and deliver to. That too had its risk. I remember the very first customer user conference we had. I felt like Frankenstein's monster, and all our customers were the villagers, and they wanted to burn me at the stake because we had our issues. Selling it and delivering it that way, we were early risk takers, and a lot of customers. Eventually, we worked through it and we got them installed, but it was, but never before was there a WMS company that grew at the pace. And I did the roadshow with Alan. I was on the board of Manhattan. We did the IPO together, and really that really was the landmark of probably the first supply chain execution software company that became a public company. And so it was great fun there. It was an explosion of people and new customers, quality company really into this day. And I know Eddie Gable, their CEO right now, a wonderful man, and great company. And then at that time, I got the attention of the investor market. I had a couple of investors come to me and say, what's the next great idea? I thought it was, and still is, it was supply chain visibility. It was utilizing technology that could take data from various other systems, putting it together so you could track product. So with others, we created Velocity. I was the founder of it, and it was exciting times. We had Dell, and Dell Ventures was an investor, as a lot of customers of ours became investors because they loved the idea of being able to, and Dell used it quite effectively to build their computer systems for personal use. So people would call in those days, you'd call in and you'd order a computer and you'd order all the parts, and then our system tracked all the parts to the manufacturing, the point of assembly, and we would assemble to that customer's specific requirements and on a specific date. And Dell was really the forerunner of doing that type of thing. Then we worked very closely with them, but we also used our technology with Ford, with a lot of other different companies, mainly to track their parts, inbound parts, and put it together for an assembly of a manufacturer. And it was exciting times, and we looked to do another IPO, and that's when, and matter of fact, I was in London. We were going to go out on Monday in London, and then the dot-com bubble burst that Friday. So I took my tail between my legs and made my way back to the States, and everybody said, well, this is just a correction, and it turned out not to be a correction. And it was tough times. Then all of a sudden, technology companies, especially anything that was internet-based, as Velocity was, and it was a struggle. And Velocity actually is still alive to this day. It's alive and well in Australia. And I think they have a company office here in the U.S. But from that, I ended up then starting another company called TrendStar. And it was mobile asset tracking. And actually, this was the company I probably had the most fun with because we were best known for tracking beer kegs. We sign contracts in Europe. In Europe, beer is considered food, and so it fell under their food tracing. Mad cow was a terrible thing that happened, and so they put new laws and regulations, and they had to track lot codes of the manufactured product back to the source and to where it was distributed to. So we ended up putting RFID tags on beer kegs. Our model was also we bought the beer keg, and then what we did was we ended up owning 6 million beer kegs in Europe, in the UK, and in Northern Europe, and we pooled the beer kegs together. So we worked with various 3PLs. We built out models of transportation models of effectively having one person or company come in, pick up empty beer kegs and deliver full beer kegs, not each beer company doing it on their own. So we took that model and we ended up putting it into the medical tracking assets using RFID technology. We did medical products in hospitals. We did air cargo containers. We did a joint venture with Lufthansa. It's still alive, called Jettainer. You'll see them at airports today. You'll see the beer kegs. It's called MicroStar in the U.S. Most of the beer kegs that you see at pubs, of course you don't see them nowadays in our world, are MicroStar beer kegs. We also did, and then the medical one was bought by GE Medical. So what we ended up doing was we took a base technology of tracking assets outside globally, and we put them into various different industries. We also use food containers for manufacturing. We used it in textile tracking. And in each case, we ended up building something that an industry, a company in that industry wanted, and they acquired it from us. And so eventually, TrendStar was eventually acquired over time by, the beer was Scottish Newcastle actually bought the European version of it. The American version of it was bought by MicroStar. That was successful, and that's when I first retired. I said, okay, that's it. I think I'm done. Life's been good. And then I went and played golf, and I didn't get any good at it. And I had a good friend of mine, Art Mesher, from Descartes Systems, and he had just taken over as CEO, and he knew that I had a lot of CEO and COO experience, and he asked me to join his team more as an advisor. And I came in, and then for a while I took over an operating role of sales and marketing. All along it was a temporary, I was sort of a rent-a guy at that time, and to really kind of help grow the company. And I believe I did. I ended up bringing in some of our salespeople that are still there. They've done an exceptional job. And so that same model, I went, and because I really didn't want to take a full-time operating role or a full-time CEO role or COO role. So I ended up joining another company, this time a robotics company called Seagrid. And it was fascinating technology that came out of Carnegie Mellon Labs, the robotic labs out of Pittsburgh, and it was technology ahead of its time. And so I was involved with the board, but also for a while I took an operating role to help develop their marketing and positioning and their strategy. It ended up being acquired by another entity, and I decided to move on. Before that, though, I was also involved with various, at this time, I started to get involved with investment firms, and I started to do advisory roles. One of them was with Kiva, the robot company that was acquired by Amazon, and I got involved with a company called Quiet Logistics, Bruce Welty and team, who use Kiva technology as part of their 3PL operational process. Very successful. It was very exciting, a great technology. Unfortunately, then Amazon bought it, took the technology away from the industry, and Quiet now has gone with Locus and done utilizing that technology right now, the AMRs, that of Locus robots. And I retired again, and I said, that's it, I'm done. And then I had two old friends of mine give me a call, Chris Cole and Jim McCarthy, of Intelligrated, and they asked me, they were a conveyor company and they wanted to make it more of a technology company. They wanted to invest in software and they wanted to invest in robotics, two areas that I've had some experience in. So they told me this will be a one-year jaunt and then you can go back to retirement land. And when I joined them, though, they were roughly probably about 200 million in sales. And then I stayed about 4 or 5 years. And then when I left, it was about $1 billion in sales. So we had a significant growth. And I became an integral part of the company. I loved working there. It was a great company, great people, much of the same culture that we had back in the day of McHugh Freeman. As a matter of fact, I met Jim and Chris from my McHugh Freeman days. They were running Bushman, and McHugh Freeman was owned by Pinnacle Automation, and Pinnacle also owned a Bushman. And so they called me, and I said yes, and I had a great time with the company, and we grew it significantly and expanded the products, especially in the software side and robotics and some of the other equipment, lights and voice, and got very involved in that. And then Honeywell came along and bought the company and I retired. And I said, that's it, no more. And I meant it, and I didn't want to certainly take any more operations roles. And then I decided, okay, I'm back to playing golf again. And then I did that for about a year and I said, okay, I'm bored. And then this industry just started to take off.
If you're interested in CSCP or other APICS credentials, there is a YouTube video where you can learn more about bootcamp style workshops at Georgia Tech. Search on APICS Bootcamp Courses Informational Webinar. If you're in the North Georgia, North Alabama, Chattanooga area, check out the traditional class formats offered by the University of Tennessee Chattanooga Center for Professional Education, Supply Chain Academy. Optionally, we can bring supply chain certification workshops to your company. Just send a note to chris@apicscoach.com. Supply Chain Boring is part of the Supply Chain Now network. We try to highlight historical events, companies, and people in supply chain management and create a picture of where the industry is headed. Interested in learning more about supply chain technology startups, mergers, acquisitions, and how companies evolve? Take a listen to Tequila Sunrise, crafted by Greg White. Or check out This Week in Business History with Supply Chain News own Scott Luton to learn more about everyday things you may take for granted and pick up short stories you can use as general conversation starters. The Logistics with a Purpose series puts a spotlight on neat and interesting organizations who are working toward a greater cause. And finally, if you're interested in logistics, freight, and transportation, take a listen to the new series, Jamin Logistics and Transportation Experience, with the Adapt and Thrive Mindset Sherpa, Jamin Alvarez. If interested in sponsoring this show or others on Supply Chain Now, send a note to chris@supplychainnowradio.com. And remember, supply chain is boring.
Okay.
So this space is so hot right now. And so I do work with, I guess I'm a retainer with 3 of them. And so I look at companies, I look at, principally they bring me in to look at their software, but really their strategy, where they fit. In the last few years, I've been very much focused in the robotics and material handling space. So I've been really engaged a lot looking. So I'm sort of the guy in the background, a lot of these deals that are, the investment guys go, well, are these guys any good? And I'll go, well, who knows? Or I can get a real sense that they are good. So it's been fun because I retired and I took it seriously for about 1.5 years. And 2 things I realized: I wasn't going to get that much better in golf, and pottery was not my future. I thought I wasn't going to make clay pots just yet. So I got back into this space mainly because of all the activity, all the acquisition activity and the investment activity that took place, and they were looking for people with experience in this area. So very busy, actually.
Well, we better save our sauce for the, that sounds like something we talk about at the end. Somebody you may know, John Hill. Do you know John Hill?
I know him well. Yes, very well.
Yeah, I just interviewed him the last session, so a couple weeks ago.
Well, people have called either he or I the father of the WMS, but we're still looking for the mother. That's a joke he and I always share.
No, that's good. Well,
He's called father of WMS. Sometimes I'm called father of WMS. So.
I didn't realize that. This is getting to be an interesting podcast trend then. So I was with him last time and then you this time.
Yeah, well, he and I go way back. I mean, I knew him when he was CEO at
Logisticon?
Yes. Yeah. And I was at IMI Systems, which was one of the first WMS companies. And I met him at a trade show. And we were probably at that time, there were only 2 or 3. And the other was actually McHugh Freeman. And then I left IMI and went to McHugh because I met Jim McHugh and I fell in love with him. He was a wonderful man. Then I went to McHugh.
Okay.
Freeman. So,
Well,
yeah,
let's get a little bit of structure into this because that's great stuff right there. I mean, if you don't mind, I'll bring him up. I'll just
no,
say,
not at all.
I talked
He's
to
a wonderful man. John Hill's a great guy.
Yeah, so he was. So with him, we went 2 sessions. He had more to say than he actually thought. So, but that's okay. We can, if we need to do that, we just, we can hard stop it. I make edits on this afterwards. So if you need to take a break, do cough, whatever, that's good. I'm a hobbyist. I'm not a professional at this, Greg. So it's we have something called Supply Chain Now. We're actually looking for investors, by the way, if you know anybody in that space. But it's we do podcasts and more around supply chain topics. Mine just happens to be a niche on what I think is people that have been exceptional leaders, form the industry. Also, what I'm finding is a lot of listenership around careers, people that are trying to get into supply chain management and maybe just look at what other people have done. So you'll notice at the end, if we do end it today, I'll ask you about your perspectives on getting into supply chain management today.
Right. Yeah.
Which it sounds like you would say robotics or something like that. So.
Well, it is just right. The whole space is actually very exciting right now. So
yeah. So
that's why I can't fully retire.
I got it.
Too much going on.
And so I may bring up some of these names, and if you know them, we can talk. If not, then I can just edit them out. But Jeff Cashman, and he's running.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I recruited him twice from Anderson to McHugh Freeman
and Velocity.
To Velocity.
Yeah, I remember that. That's where I got to know him more.
Yeah.
Velocity. So.
Yeah.
And you've got quite a following. Well, great. Well, let me just intro. It's not about me. It's about you. So whatever you want to share, that's going to be great. It doesn't sound like you're short on stories.
No. I have stories and scars. I won't show you the scars.